Hello, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to everyone who's joined us online for Henley and Partners' 16th Annual Global Citizenship Conference. My name's Juliette Foster, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce our panelists for this next session, which is focused on the lessons we can learn from Dubai, which has been extremely successful at attracting global wealth and talent. Indeed, according to the Henley Global Citizens Report, the UAE is expected to attract the largest net inflow of high net worth individuals across the world this year. Well, joining me online to unpack why Dubai has become such a wealth magnet and what we can learn from that extraordinary success is Dr. Robert Mogielnicki. He's a senior resident scholar at the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington, and Philippe Amarante, who's head of Henley and Partners Dubai office. Gentlemen, welcome. It's good to see you. Robert, let me start first with you. I want to focus on Dubai's background. There's an extraordinary story, namely, how did it go from having an economy dependent on oil and pearl fishing to becoming a successful global hub?
Well, what we have to remember in Dubai is that the emirate never had substantial hydrocarbon reserves to begin with. For that reason, Dubai had to focus on other non-oil segments of its economy. Early on in its history, that meant a focus on pearling. But later on, the emirate diversified into more advanced economic activities. One of those areas where they met a tremendous degree of success was in the free zone sector, where they developed the Jebel Ali Free Zone in the 1980s. This zone has become a flagship entity in Dubai and now accounts for 30% of the Emirates' GDP. It attracts companies and investors from all over the world. And it's just one of the ways in which Dubai has taken a leading role in becoming a commercial hub.
Robert, let's broaden things out, because how is it that Dubai has managed to maintain its stability with Abu Dhabi, given the significant degree of economic autonomy that the UAE's constitution actually affords emirate-level governments?
Well, Dubai and Abu Dhabi enjoy a solid relationship, but of course, there is a certain degree of healthy competition between the two neighboring emirates. This is in many respects a reflection of the UAE's constitution, which affords substantial economic autonomy to emirate-level governments. On the one hand, Dubai is the business and commercial hub of the UAE, and on the other hand, Abu Dhabi is the capital and the seat of government. And in many respects, its economy revolves around significant hydrocarbon reserves and the financial resources that it's been able to accrue from exporting those oil and gas commodities. I believe that in many respects, these two emirates have learned how to work together, balancing the commercial side with expertise in oil and gas. And at the end of the day, these emirates are part of the same country. So while there may be healthy competition, they're going to fall in line and essentially work together to advance the interests of the UAE's economy.
And let's shift the spotlight now on Dubai's foreign policy. Is it based on the concept that foreign policy should be good for business? And if that's the case, how does it contrast with Abu Dhabi's approach?
Dubai's success is in large part due to an openness to the world economy. And by that, I mean that Dubai has to be a place where investors, where companies, where entrepreneurs, where tourists can come. And not only can they come, can they easily arrive, can they easily stay as long as they want, and actually decide to invest if they so choose. On the other hand, Abu Dhabi, of course, wants to attract investors, wants to attract firms and tourists, and they're doing all of those things. But the government primarily relies on hydrocarbon exports to fund public sector revenues. So if we look at the source of revenues that are underlying governments in both of these emirates, that of course is going to impact the government's outlook toward foreign policy and foreign relations. Dubai wants to maintain solid business relations with as many international partners as possible. Abu Dhabi, I would say, wants to do the same. However, there have been a number of analysts who have looked at Abu Dhabi's foreign policy as a bit more adventurous, a bit more aggressive in the sense of trying to accomplish strategic objectives for the UAE within the region and beyond. But a lot of that started to change with the emergence of the coronavirus in 2020, which precipitated a severe economic downturn across the globe, but also in the Middle East. And it made many Middle Eastern governments, including those in the UAE, government officials, take a hard look at their domestic economy and focus on the urgent domestic concerns. And I believe as we have emerged from this coronavirus pandemic and the associated economic downturn, there is a widely held belief in the UAE that foreign policy ultimately has to be good for business, and that foreign policy has to support commercial objectives, not just for Abu Dhabi, not just for Dubai, but for the entire UAE. So now we're seeing a lot of the foreign policy initiatives revolving around engagement with leading global markets and trying to secure comprehensive economic partnership agreements, or CEPAs, as a way to better engage with international partners on a primarily economic level, more so than anything else.
Okay, Philippe, come into the conversation because I really want to pick up on some of the points which were raised there in that answer. The idea about Dubai's economic base, because yes, it has been extremely successful wealth-wise and in attracting investors, something we'll look at in a few moments. But is there a sense that it's somehow striving to diversify that economic base? And how are these constituent parts breaking down?
I don't think it's a question of whether if it diversifies us. I think the question is how fast it will do it and whether we are actually even able to observe the speed and the acceleration they're going through. And it comes back to what Robert said. And I think we're going to talk about this also later. The habitat, the ecosystem that the UAE is providing for very agile and nimble policy making enables these different industries and businesses basically to rise, right? At the end of the day, I think the key message that the UAE leadership has been now articulating for many, many years is that the general doctrine here is pro-business and everything else has to follow, right? So you're going to have the critical businesses, particularly in Abu Dhabi, as Rob says, in oil and gas, but then you have the very critical real estate sector, which is now slightly, I wouldn't say overtaking, but on steroids, just because of the influx of people coming. You have regulation in the DIFC, ADGM, which is on par with international regimes and jurisdictions that give people some certainty when it comes to international business rules. And I think that overall is just, again, accelerating this diversification of economy from tech into old industrial, white-collar industries as well.
Would you say that Dubai has become more attractive to investors and high net worth individuals, more so, in fact, than countries like Australia, Switzerland, or New Zealand? And why is that, apart from the fantastic lifestyle that it offers up to those who are prepared to relocate?
Yes, indeed. And data is showing that, right? So a few weeks ago, a few months ago, we actually launched a new wealth report, which outlines the migration, the flow of high net worth people. Migration, in fact, and Dubai has been taking the crown, I think, with 4,000 millionaires expected to relocate. And New Zealand, I think, has 800, Switzerland, maybe 2,000, Australia, 3,500. So there's massive advantage now with Dubai or the UAE itself. I think the question is more with what do they come, right? There's the very popular anecdote about very wealthy people relocating to Dubai and buying the villa on the Palm. But is that critical sort of capital contribution to the economy itself? Does it transform? Does it diversify the economy? And I think there's maybe some work to be done. But indeed, those investors, entrepreneurs, next generation that will be successful in the roads, they do like this very fast pace of regulatory frameworks being adapted to what these people need. So it's a little bit of, the hammer meets the nail, and they just go into symbiosis.
And Robert, there is that thing about friendly rivalry. So given that, what are Dubai and the UAE's Gulf neighbours doing to attract wealth and talent? Because clearly these guys are doing something right.
The elephant in the room in terms of regional competition is absolutely Saudi Arabia. There's so much economic momentum taking place in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia at the moment under the leadership of Mohammed bin Salman, and in particular his Vision 2030, which despite what you may think of the kingdom, despite what you may think of Mohammed bin Salman and his reform agenda, there absolutely is economic transformation and social transformation taking place in Saudi Arabia, and that's creating a lot of buzz, a lot of interest. Where the difficulty comes in is for Saudi Arabia to actually translate this buzz and this interest into concrete investments. And at the moment, I would say that the UAE, and in particular Dubai, still has a significant advantage over Saudi Arabia. Not because it's bigger than Saudi Arabia, it's not a larger economy. And potentially not because it has the same degree of excitement or momentum going on. There's not as much change necessarily going on in the UAE. And that's not a bad thing. And I'll clarify what I mean. What I mean is the UAE's pace of change has stayed consistent. It's incredibly ambitious, but it's been so for a long period of time. If we look over at Saudi Arabia, a lot of people use the metaphor that it's, a dragon waking up. And that creates a lot of uncertainty. And to this day, a number of investors and entrepreneurs say, we like what's going on in Saudi Arabia. We like the direction and the pace of reforms, but there's still a tremendous degree of uncertainty. We don't really know what the economy is going to look like. We don't quite know what the society is going to look like. And we're not sure how that is all going to filter down in terms of regulations and impact our business or my startup or where my kids can go to school. If we go back to the UAE and Dubai, the answers to those questions are much clearer. Those questions and those concerns have been addressed long ago, and that creates a certain degree of confidence and a certain degree of clarity around the economic program and the economic strategy in the country. And to my mind, that is the biggest and the most important advantage that Dubai as an emirate and also the UAE can use to promote itself to international investors and firms. This consistency of economic strategy, the consistency of regulations, and also their ability to maintain an incredibly ambitious economic transformation agenda.
Philippe, you said earlier or talked earlier about the steps which the Dubai is taking to accommodate investors, but do the blurred lines between the public and private sectors perhaps make Dubai a high-risk place for anybody who wants to put in their cash? And what protections are in place to reduce exposure to financial risks?
I think with what Robert said is the certainty and sort of the reliability that, let's say, the DIFC is providing to international investors. It's the rule of law that is following international standards, and that's very well respected. So you have two factors here. I think you have the soft factor about brand, about feel-good temperature that Dubai is presenting and sort of radiating to the international investor world. And then you just have the very dry, high and dry rule of law, which is on par with jurisdictions that are, the usual players when we talk about leading financial hubs or leading financial wealth centers. So Dubai is on the trajectory to become part of the community and maybe at some point even spearheading it. In terms of risks, I would argue the risks are very similar to other jurisdictions. In fact, maybe even less so, because what Dubai is doing very well under the leadership here is they're listening to the advice that is based on common sense and common logic. And these elements are at some point maybe not so much really, let's say, applied in other centers. The pandemic has been an eye-opener for many, many, many people, I guess, even for myself, right? The speed and the determination that the leadership here has applied in managing that crisis just sort of is evidence for other solutions or, let's say, other challenges that might arise. So if they apply the same paradigm and the sort of same way of efficient, transparent, and agile decision-making, I think the risks here are less than maybe in other financial hubs.
Let's follow on, in fact, from the COVID lessons and go a little bit further back in time, Robert, to 2008, the financial crisis, the global financial crisis, in fact. What lessons did Dubai learn from that? And how has it used those same lessons to fortify its position among investors to make it more attractive?
Well, the key lesson that we all took away from the financial crisis is that not all growth is necessarily healthy. And we can arguably look at what's going on in China right now as a reinforcement of this lesson, that some growth can actually be unhealthy. If we look at how Dubai fared in the 2008, 2009 period, one of the major issues that government officials had to grapple with were unsustainable loans held by government-related entities. And to my knowledge, the government has made significant strides in working with government-related entities and private sector partners as well, major private sector players, to ensure that they're not at risk of being, at risk of holding unsustainable loans. And I know that the government has set up a number of committees to monitor this progress. So I believe, one of the major issues around the financial crisis is certainly on the mind of policymakers and is being followed very closely. On another level, Dubai is not quite recession-proof, but I would go so far as to say that the Emirate has a long history of being and acting as a safe haven for capital, for firms, for investors that are looking for a safe and a consistent location to relocate at times of crises, whether they be financial crises, whether they be regional conflicts or other geopolitical turbulences taking place across the world, which unfortunately we know is more and more becoming the norm in the world that we live in. So, back to the point we've touched on many times today, to the degree that Dubai can continue to operate as a attractive location with clear rules and regulations, it's going to continue to benefit from trade and investment inflows.
Robert, let me stay with the question of economics, because look, we know that turbulence is forecast for 2023. How do you see that impacting Dubai? And is it well positioned to emerge unscathed from the economic trauma?
The biggest political risk in 2023 is certainly going to be related to geopolitical developments across the globe. But in the Middle East and North Africa, there's a tremendous focus on the oil and gas industry, and in particular, the price of energy commodities. Luckily for Dubai, Dubai doesn't need to rely so much, at least as much as its neighbor Abu Dhabi and other Gulf countries, on the price of energy commodities to have a robust economy. So to my mind, Dubai policymakers will continue their current trajectory, will continue their proven strategy of reaching out to investors and reaching out to firms that they want to attract to the Emirate, determining what they need to do to attract those individuals and those firms, and then implementing very well-planned, clear policies to facilitate those trade and investment flows. That's a model that they've used again and again, and it's proven to be successful, and I suspect they will continue to stick with that for as long as they can.
Okay, so Philippe, what lessons do you think others can learn from Dubai's journey? And do they have the capabilities to replicate its success?
That's a simple question, I think, with difficult answers. Can they replicate it? Maybe if they do have similar organic assets at their hand. I think it's important to understand that Dubai's success is also just due to its geographic position, right? Now, can others replicate it if they follow similar equation? I think yes, maybe. But I guess only within limits, right? The acceleration of globalization has been so fast over the past years, and Dubai just manifested itself as being that respected, well-governed sort of lighthouse that reflects transformation at its core, right? But there are lessons that can be replicated, maybe within some regional sort of specification. And then, we talked about Saudi, the elephant in the room, which maybe doesn't only replicate it, but maybe does it even wider and on a larger scale, what Dubai did in terms of transformation. Now, so coming back to the question, I think in principle, yes, but there needs to be a certain framework that is based on organic assets available, and that is geographic proximity to key markets, to future markets. We talk here about Africa being the gateway in between major hubs. And then at the end of the day, overall, the willingness of its leadership to basically step up and create this ecosystem that allows people to thrive, as simple as that.
Going forward, can that business model continue to survive? Because the global market, you could argue, is already fairly saturated, if not quite, with financial hubs, which are doing exactly the same thing, trying to attract the wealthy and individuals of high net worth standing.
Yes, indeed. But I think one of the key value propositions the UAE and Dubai has to offer is its constant innovation, right? And I think that is maybe what allows them to continue position themselves spearheading that movement of transformation. And if you look about the usual suspects that were, the community of internationally well-regarded, well-respected financial hubs, for instance, such as Switzerland, crisis that we have right now in Eastern Europe is sort of forcing them to apply a limit on their regulation that does bring disadvantage to certain people, and they lose trust in the neutrality of their jurisdiction, and they lose trust in the brand. Dubai has capitalized on that particularly very strongly. And I said, we have open arms, and everybody who wants to make a difference to our economy is welcome and can come to us and do so. So I think there will be an opportunity for Dubai to continue in competition, challenge other jurisdictions. One of them is, of course, Singapore, but also maybe London, and particularly if we look into banking, maybe Wall Street, New York. It will find its niche, but it will thrive on its constant appetite for innovation. It will not stand still.
In a sense, you've answered the final question, which I wanted to put to you, which was really Dubai potentially having to modify its model to stay ahead of the game. And based on what you said a few moments ago, it appears that that may well be the case, and it's willing to take on that challenge.
Yes, indeed. That's what I see here being on the ground. That's what I hear from conversations with my peers, with other industry leaders. There is this very, very hard cemented dialogue in between decision-making leadership, the economic leadership, and everybody has the same vision in just basically building Dubai as one of the most respected global hubs for innovation, for trade, for wealth management, for whatever you have. And I think, Dubai is on an amazing trajectory to achieve exactly that.
There we have to leave it, but thank you both for your time and, of course, your valuable contribution to this session of Henley and Partners' 16th Annual Global Citizenship Conference, in which we've examined the success of Dubai and how it's managed to position itself as one of the world's biggest wealth magnets. And a big thank you as well to our global online audience. We appreciate both your interest and engagement.